Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in a million kalpas. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize the Tathagata's true meaning. We are at the section of the Heart Sutra where I call Know Our World. Know Your World. So in the last set of talks, Shifu talked about some general qualities about all dharmas, and that is the universe, including you and I and the world. Neither arising nor ceasing, neither impure nor pure, neither increasing nor decreasing. All dharmas are empty in character, right? So now we're going to continue to explore that topic. So the next lines are no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. No form, sound, smell, touch, taste, or dharmas. So the first list of 6 items refer to what we call the 6 senses or 6 sense organs. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And the next list refers to the object of our perception. What our eyes see, our form. Sound is what our ears hear. So form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or dharmas. So let's look at these 6 pairs, one pair at a time. Eye and form. Form refers all the physical things that we can perceive with our eyes. Now, this form has appeared before in the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, conception, volition, and consciousness. Remember what that term form refers to in the 5 skandhas? It refers to the all physical matter, our whole body, and this world, the physical world. So that's what the form aggregate refers to. But here in this list, it has a narrower definition. The form here refers to what the eyes see. So of course we see the physical world, but it specifically refers to the light, the shapes, the colors that is perceived by the eyes. Okay, so everybody has eyes, and everybody can see things. Why does the Heart Sutra says no eye and no form? So the sutra is supposed to tell us about reality. How can it here blatantly contradict our experience? In order to understand this, let us look at something. Here is a picture of what is called the electromagnetic spectrum. So electromagnetic spectrum is basically the frequency range or the wavelength range of light. So light is a form of electrical magnetic wave, right? So this is a lot of physics involved. What scientists have discovered is that electricity and magnetism are really the same thing. and they are really the same thing as light. A light is just another name for this phenomenon. And depending on the frequency of the light, so the light is a light wave, right? So it's frequencies. Depending on the different frequencies, we have different phenomena in this world that are related. For example, the form that we see with our eyes is called visible light. Visible light. So they go from wavelength of 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. So a nanometer is a billionth of a meter, very tiny. When light vibrates at a certain frequency, so that the wavelength is so small, between 400 and 700, is called visible light, because that is the range of human beings can see. But there are other kinds of light that we don't see. For example, ultraviolet light and infrared light. We're all familiar with that, right? So ultraviolet light is called ultraviolet because it's at the end of the spectrum. The higher end of the spectrum, or the frequency spectrum, where we can see. So we see from violet to blue light, to green light, yellow light, orange light, red light. As it goes from violet to red, the frequency is lower, the wavelengths are higher. And so on the other end of the spectrum, we see red, and then if the frequency is lower than red, then we don't see it anymore. It's still there. The light is still there. It's called infrared. On the higher frequency spectrum, we have ultraviolet light, so which everybody has heard of. The sun has ultraviolet light. So sun shines on Earth, and we receive the full spectrum of the sun's light, and that includes ultraviolet and possibly infrared. And then even higher, we have what's called X-rays. So everybody's heard of X-rays. You go to a doctor, you take a picture, and it is a picture of your bones. And that's because ordinary light or visible light cannot penetrate your flesh and skin. But when the wavelength is shorter, when the frequency is higher, it can penetrate your body. And then that's why it can take a picture of your bones. So X-ray is just light, but with a higher frequency. And gamma rays, you may have heard of this gamma rays in cosmic rays. They are even higher frequency. Okay, those are probably the highest frequency that we may have heard of. So gamma rays we don't see, X-rays we don't see, ultraviolet we don't see, but they are real light, as real as visible light. But so when our eyes see, why do we call them eyes? Because they see, right? Because they see. But the reality is they only see a very small section of the spectrum of light. How the range of light is possible in this world, we only see a small section of it. And on the lower side, lower frequency side, we have other common forms of light that you normally don't think of as light. For example, infrared, microwave. So microwave is on the lower side of the frequency range. And there's radio waves, TV waves. They are also on the lower frequency, and your cell phone that can receive information is because of these waves, right? So the different frequencies, they do a lot of things for us, right? So we listen to radio, we watch TV, and we use cell phone. All of those is because of electromagnetic waves that carry information, and they are light, but our eyes don't see. So if you imagine that this is the spectrum of light, what our eyes see are only this very small section of light, which we call visible light, and all the others are invisible light. So it is like if you look at a window, light comes through the window, right? You call it a window because you can see outside. But a window is no window because it actually blocks other light that is not through the window. So your eyes actually block light. You can think of it that way. It blocks what? Ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma rays. It blocks radio waves, TV waves, microwaves. So we have something called radio telescope, right? Radio telescope is like a regular telescope. With a regular telescope, you can see far away. Radio telescope, it sees light in the radio wave range. So to us, it functions in the dark, but it's not dark. At night, you think this is dark, there's no light. So the eyes don't see anything, but there's plenty of light. It's just our eyes don't see it. So, can you say our eyes is actually like the blind of the window you draw down, and it blocks light. So, on the one hand, our eyes see light, but it's only a small section of light. But it is like a blind, the opposite of eyes. It blocks out many other kinds of light. So the Heart Sutra says there's no I. I is not an I. Eyes are not eyes. Does that make sense now? Mm-hmm. So when you understand how eyes function, they see light. They see form. But you also understand how eyes are not eyes. They block out other lights. Then you have a more precise understanding of what eyes are. Right? So eye is not an eye, and therefore it's called an eye. You see? When you see what eyes can do and what eyes cannot do, then you come back and look at eyes. Okay, now I know eyes better. I know more of the reality of eyes. And that's what Prajna is teaching us, the reality of things. You only know that eyes can see, then you know very little about eyes. So with the help of science, this makes perfect sense now. Eyes are not eyes, and therefore they are eyes. Now that is what's called an eye. It's a human eye. But there are other animals that can see beyond the visible light. So visible light only applies to humans. So the next picture shows the different objects in our life so that we can get a sense of what these different wavelengths mean. For example, X-ray. The wavelength for X-rays is on the scale of an atom. And the wavelength for ultraviolet light is on the scale of molecules. And the wavelength of microwaves is on the scale of small animals like butterflies. Okay, so you get some sort of idea. So now, are they eyes or are they blinds? Can we also call them blinds? Yeah, that would also make sense. So another way we can examine the emptiness of eyes and form is this. Think about color. So the eyes see color. What is color? What is, for example, green color? All right. So here's a quote from a scientific report. It says, "Color is an illusion, not part of the real world." And the article go on to explain the science about this. Basically, bacteria, memory, language, all may affect how we see color. So it's interesting article. The title of the article is "Your Brain is Lying to You. Color is all in your head," and other colorful facts. The link is given in the lecture notes. Let me explain simply. You look at a tree and you see the green leaves, right? Why is the leaf green? So if you remember your high school physics, you may remember, well, the leaf, the object, is a particular color is because when light shines on it, say white light shines on it, the object absorbs certain frequency of light, and it does not absorb. Whatever it does not absorb, it is bounced off. So reflects other light. So a leaf is green is because it absorbed. When sun, the white light, shines on a leaf, it absorbs red light, blue light, violet light, yellow light, and it doesn't want to absorb green light. So it reflects green light off, and that bounces to our eyes, and our eyes sees what bounces off that object. So we say, oh, that leaf is green. But if you think about it, the leaf is anything but green. It takes all the other colors in, but it doesn't want green. So whenever we see a white wall, it rejects all colors, right? A black object, it absorbs all colors. It actually contains all colors inside. So that's an interesting fact. Yeah, and what happens when our eyes sees a color or shape? So you may have learned also in some basic biology that our eyes have these little things called cones and rods, right? So these cones and rods detect the shape and the color. But really, when we say color, we really just detect certain frequency of light, right? And it encodes that information into bits of information that's generated chemically. So basically, they are chemical electrical signals encoded by your neurons, and it gets transmitted via the visual neurons to your visual cortex. Your visual cortex is the part of your brain that processes visual information. So your brain that actually reads those information and interprets it as green, blue, red, round, square, whatever shape. But your brain actually never see light. Your brain actually never see any of that. It only sees it encoded, kind of like 1 and zeros and so on, that it was sent by your eyes and neurons. And it reconstructs that into whatever shapes and colors we see. Isn't that strange? So what we think we see, the forms, is actually not so straightforward. There's encoding. It's kind of like computers, yeah? If you look at a computer screen, it has pictures or text, but no, it's just 1 and 0 information, and then it gets displayed as bits of light, different color light, and we interpret that as text or photos or video, right? So our brain never actually sees any light directly, only sees encoded information and interprets it as the objects. So how real is the world that we see. So in English, we say seeing is believing. But we also know that a lot of times what we see fool us, right? We see something happening and we interpret that to mean something, but actually it doesn't. So no I is not a denial that we have this I organ, but is pointing to a different side of the reality of your eyes. And that's what prajna does a lot. Points you to a different side of that reality that ordinary people do not see. And when you see the other part, the other side, the other angle, and when you come back, combine with what you already know, then you get closer to the reality of these phenomena. In a similar way, let's look at ears and sound. Ears and sound. When ears hear sound, what really is happening is that the sound, which is actually just vibrations of air. So sound is no sound, it's just vibrations of air. Do you think of vibrations of air as sound? Not unless you're a scientist, right? So we have vibrations of air all the time, and when the ear hears it, or when it strikes the ear, the drum of the ear inside vibrates, and then it triggers more vibration in your inner ear, and that in turn encodes, or that information is encoded into, again, chemical electro signals, and that gets sent to your auditory cortex, which is the part of your brain that processes sound information. So again, your brain never hears anything. It just receives this 1 and 0 and 1 and 0 and say, oh, that's Chopin, that's Beethoven, that's punk rock, or that's my friend's voice, and that's the Dharma chanting of the Heart Sutra, and that's the bird, and that's the leaves rustling. Your brain takes those 1s and 0s and reconstructs the sound to make you think that you hear all these different sounds directly when they are making that sound. It is an illusion recreated by your brain. So let's imagine a different kind of animal that have a very different kind of brain structure and different kind of eye or ear structure. If their structure is different, then what kind of world would they perceive? Would be sitting next to each other, and we would see a very different world. Yeah, in fact, that is true. If you see a big picture of mosquito, they have very complicated, called multiple eyes. Not like we have 2 eyes. They have thousands and thousands of eyes, and their tiny little brain composes that. It's like, you cover your one eye, you see something, right? You cover the other eye, you see something. And then our brain can composite these 2 pictures into one whole 3D picture. Now imagine you have thousands of pictures coming in at the same time, always a little bit different angle, right? You can't even imagine what a mosquito sees. Can you imagine? We don't even know how to interpret that. We don't even know how to imagine that. But that's what a mosquito sees. And their eyes are very fast, about 3 or 4 times faster than human eyes. So that's why it's hard to swap the mosquitoes. They see your hand as slow motion. Another thing is that just like the light spectrum, there's sound spectrum, and that's called hertz, right? So human beings with the best eyes can hear about 20 hertz which is the sound wave vibrating at 20 cycles per second, I believe, per second. So vibrations of air at 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. That's the range of sound that we can hear. But there's also sound beyond those range, right, on both ends. So on the lower end, it's like bass, very low sound. And on the higher frequency, you have high-pitched sound, like tremble. And so elephants, the picture shows elephants can hear sounds much lower than what we can hear. So those humming vibrations that we don't hear, but elephants can hear. And cats and dogs, they can hear up to 40,000 hertz, 40K hertz. We can hear up to 20K hertz. So there'll be sound that we don't hear anything, but it bugs the heck out of these cats and dogs. They go crazy. And that has actually happened. There's some high-pitched noise that we don't hear, but it would drive the pet at the house crazy, and their owners never figure out what's going on until much later. And it shows that dolphins can hear up to 160 kilohertz. We can hear to 20K, 160K. So imagine what kind of a musical world that dolphins hear. So dolphins can hear bat, and dolphins can hear something from like a little bit higher than 20 hertz to all the way up to 160 kilohertz. So that's a much greater range than what we can hear. So bats, we know that they have very poor vision, but they have very good ears. So they use sound to map out their world. In other words, they see with sound. So if a person was born blind, they can become very good at navigating the world, much better than ordinary people, right? Because they're much more sensitive to the tiny sounds and the echoes that we fail to notice. Another thing is, if a person was born blind, then visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes visual signals, are useless. But the brain is very smart. They would shift that part of the brain to become auditory cortex, so they will have a much bigger auditory cortex. In other words, it can process a lot more sound information. They can become much more tuned, much more sensitive to sound. So in a way, you can say the blind person map the world kind of like a bat in the way that we see this world. So when we understand this, then we look back at ears and sound, we get a fresh perspective, right? We get closer to the reality of ears and sound. Now, the interesting thing is that how does Buddha knew about this thousands of years ago? You say, but Buddha didn't talk about electromagnetic waves. Wait a minute. Buddha did say in 1 cup of water, river water, there are 84,000 tiny little organisms, tiny little living beings. So that's why the monks, when they drink river water, water from the earth, from a well, they have to use a filter, a very fine filter to filter out these little organisms that we don't see with our human eye. But how would Buddha know about that? And Buddha also said, human beings, we fall in love with our body. But when the Buddha look at the body, a human body, it's just an aggregate of nests of little bugs. 虫窝, just this nest of little bugs here, inside everywhere. That is really amazing, isn't it? Because that is so true. What scientists are saying now is that your body is basically an aggregate of bacteria. You're just all kinds of bacteria working together interdependently. That's what scientists are saying. You are the bacteria in your body. And they can actually affect you in many, many ways, including your mood, your preferences, and so on. But we won't get into that. You can, if you're interested, you can search yourself. So Buddha is able to see things or hear things that ordinary human beings can't. And these teachings are confirmed more and more by scientific discoveries. That's a different topic that we won't go into today, but we talked a little bit about it in the Heart Sutra before. How science confirmed many of the teachings that the Buddha taught in the sutras that seems to be incredible or miraculous or ridiculous, but actually they are true. So in a similar way, your ears block out a lot of the sound, a lot of the vibrations, right? So the information is there that the dolphin can hear, that the elephant can hear, that the bats can hear, but we totally miss because our eardrums are not sensitive enough. You only perceive a specific range of information and blocks out others. So ears are not ears, and sound is not sound. What is sound? Vibrations. And then when it gets to the brain, what the brain thinks it is sound, it's not even vibrations of the air anymore, it's just electromagnetic signals. It's just 1 and zeros. I say 1 and zeros because the neurons in our brain imitate that by firing or not firing. So firing will be a 1, not firing it will be a 0. So it's really a binary encoding of the information that we see or hear or taste or smell or feel. Nose and smell. So what we smell, our scientists discovered there are molecules that float in the air that coming from the object, like the food or the flower, and these molecules stimulate our nose, and our nose